Hello, everyone. Welcome to our Spirituality and Aging podcast. I'm Chris Jensen.
And I'm Kathy Lee Taylor.
We're so happy you joined us today. We've got some really fun information, I think very deep information today. We're going to talk about how when the soul comes through, the ego loses ground. And so what happens in that process? So, Kathy, let me ask you, you've been through a process like this. So
Sure.
how did it start out for you? What were your stumbling blocks?
Well, this is such a good question because this is what happens when even when you start yoga in the beginning, but also is happening still 40 years later. It's a growth process. You continue to notice that the ego loses control, right? And the soul starts to express more. So when you ask me that question, I have to think back to when I began. And when I first came through the yoga center, as you know, and for those listeners who haven't heard me say this before, Chris was my first teacher. She was my first yoga teacher and, became such a mentor and friend. And so she's seen me through all the ugly swamp dealings of dealing with the ego and all of that stuff. So my first thing that came up when I started meditating and getting much better at what would be the being more balanced, having more balance of body, mind, and spirit, was that I had a huge character flaw. I was really arrogant.
Now, most people are not willing to admit that. So,
well, do you remember back then?
I remember. Yeah, I remember. Yeah, I would agree. I would agree. So, yeah.
She would not have said that at the time. She would let me go through my process or whatever. But I was very arrogant, and so I needed to look at why that was. Certainly, it was a character flaw I probably carried with me into this lifetime. But I also had a difficult childhood, and it came out of really a sense of having to protect myself, having to survive on a lot of levels. There was a lot of challenges as a young person that I had to go through. And being arrogant allowed me to be right versus wrong. And I, was able to make decisions that got me out of tough situations, like leaving home when I was 16 years old and going to university, and then finding myself with a backpack and traveling to California at 22 years old,
See, I don't see those things necessarily as arrogant, but just as someone who's determined to make their own way.
Yes, okay, but that tendency of being right all the time, that's
that's arrogance. That's arrogance, right?
And what came from was being very judgmental of other people. So why I related to, that determined part of me, it also meant that, I was the lead follower, get out of my way person, So what was lacking there, very much so, was my ability to be compassionate, my ability to step outside of my little world where I was terrified, where I was, having to take care of myself from a very, very young age, having been away from home at a very young age. And I had to do big adult things, right? So somebody standing in my way was not getting kindness from me. That was the thing.
Okay.
That was the thing. I had to stop and say, okay, what does that feel like for that other person when I talk like that? Or my message lands on them and you can see it hurts, Like I remember in the training we had when we were going through teacher training, and there was this questionnaire he had given us, and I said something about the truth being something about the truth. I can't totally what I meant it as something that I was discussing my mother and some of the conflicts that I'd had with her. And I said something about always telling the truth. And he said something that changed my life forever. And that was, he said, the truth is always kind.
Kind. It's always kind. And I want to just say here, a lot of times people say they're speaking their truth. They're really just throwing their opinions out on other people.
Or being angry.
Or, well, mostly it comes from anger when they do that. So
Yeah.
is that what you're saying, where you thought you were doing?
No doubt about it.
Mhm.
No doubt about it. And I still have that tendency. I mean, I'm especially when I'm playing sports, because I was raised by a guy who was a coach, and aggressive behavior was encouraged. So even when I'm playing sports now, I'll stop myself from saying something that I'm thinking, but like,
Mhm.
but I won't do it because I know how that feels on the other side, and I don't want to cause any pain. At some point in your yoga journey, you take a commitment to not hurting somebody, called ahimsa, right? It's the idea that Gandhi talked about. You don't hurt anything, any being at all. And so I have
And
to.
isn't sports a lot about teamwork too, not just aggression? Mhm.
What? Say that again.
Isn't sports, like you said, you grew up with your dad who was a coach?
No, not not in tennis, not very much. I mean, when you're playing
Okay,
doubles, it's supposed to be,
yeah,
but most people don't get to that level
okay.
unless you're playing on a pro level. So
Mhm.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah, team is something actually that I did know how to do as a child. But that was my dad taught me that, and I was really, really good at it, and that's why I enjoyed it. But I also was on a baseball team
Mhm.
with a bunch of women, so we learned how to work as a team.
Mhm.
So, and that's an incredible skill off the topic, but incredible
Sure.
skill for to have, sure. But yeah, I started once I realized that when he said the truth is always kind, it shifted something in me that I never went back on. And at that time, a lot of the arrogance was shed. A
Mhm.
lot of it was just not necessary anymore. And of course, you know, be practicing yoga, you learn humility, and that grows.
Yeah,
It's
I was thinking that, his statement resonated for you because you've been doing the work. You've
right.
been doing the yoga practices, and the ego was, as we say in yoga, was softening.
Yes, it was softening. Yes, that's very, very true. Plus, let's not forget that on my journey, the biggest lesson I had to learn was to open my heart. I was very closed off. I was very hurt. I was carrying a lot of
Mhm.
trauma from childhood. I was carrying a lot of anger about that. So as the heart opened and softened, so did the ego. So did the ego. So that was a big part of that as well.
Yeah, that's an important issue because a lot of people think, if that the ego is going to die, or it's, and it's fearful. It's a scary thing for them, but it really just what happens. Would you say that it's just softening and just allowing the soul to come through? I mean, is
Yes.
that your experience?
Yes. And it's a funny thing because I relate to it now, the ego now, way different than I did back then. Trying to understand what this voice was inside my head, or this, alter kind of identity that was working against
Mm.
myself, I came to the understanding that as long as I was surrendering control, as long as I was surrendering to what my inner self wanted, the ego didn't have any say in that process. I mean, it would try to rear its head, and it still tries to rear its head. I mean, I was driving home from an appointment today, and all I could think was about the that I dropped my computer. It's like, I can't control that right now, so just shut up. you know Sometimes you have to tell your ego, shut up. I'm not.
Yeah, the ego wants to be in control for sure. Yeah.
Ego always wants to be in control, and I think that's a really important point, because the ego doesn't just die and you become, I don't know. Well, you do get
Gandhi
a
or something, right?
get a lot of you do get a lot of qualities as you continue to go farther down the path. You get more time spent in bliss and peace and all those wonderful things that you're always striving for. But that doesn't mean the ego is gone. And maybe that's an enlightenment process I have yet to get
Yeah.
close to.
Yeah,
But
the idea I think in yoga is that the ego's transformed. It's not that
yeah,
it's gone, and I
yes.
think what you're describing is that process of how your ego was transformed.
Well, and that's a great question for you. How do you know when the ego is working with you instead of against you?
Well, it's interesting. One time I had a message with Ramakrishnananda, our teacher and the yoga master, and I had just turned a certain age, and I thought I was young, but I thought it was old. And so, and I asked him, I said, I think my problem is ego. And he said, no. He said, your ego is very cooperative. He said, your problem is just old habits.
Oh, that's on my list. That's on old stories, old habits. You
Old
have
habits.
some,
Right. So the ego will, with some work, will cooperate with the process, but that doesn't mean it doesn't hold you back ever either,
Mm,
because although my ego was cooperative, when one of the processes in yoga, when you start to meditate and things start happening, energy moves from the base of the spine up, this kundalini energy. And so he was watching me meditate at this appointment, and he said, well, here's what's happening. He said, Shakti, this energy is moving. He said, and your body's going like this. It's like, what is this? Let me, and he said, it's just very powerful. And,
right.
you
Scared
know,
of it.
so the ego was, hey, I want to control this. I might die. And so for me, it was a process of getting comfortable with that. And it's an ongoing process as I go deeper and deeper of, not, there seems to be like a fear of death, or I'm
Mm,
not sure what it is, but it's something like that. And so it's an ongoing process of always stepping back and getting in touch. And then when that soul comes through, you relax, and all this, resistance is kind of goofy, but at the moment doesn't feel goofy. So,
mm.
you know,
That's so true. And what you made me think about was you don't just take the ego and sort it all out and you got it figured out and you're going to put it in a box and it's never going to get to play again.
true.
But not that, it doesn't mean that once you have this understanding of how it works, that everything just goes away and you got no issues and you
No,
got,
it doesn't work like that. No.
like you just said, there's, you get to a certain level of trauma and self-healing, and all of that comes up when the kundalini first starts to move, and the particular chakras are letting you know, oh, there's something here that hasn't needs a little work. This needs a little work, and so you become aware of it, and you start to, let go or surrender or heal or whatever it is you have to do, and then you get to that place where you realize, oh my God, my ego has a perspective of a 5-year-old. Like I have all these old beliefs that don't work for an adult, like things that you perceived as a 5-year-old child that might be protecting you or keeping you safe or helping with your survival, or putting you in a place where you feel notice that you're not loved or whatever it is. Those ideas, those uh, brainworms or whatever you want to call them, have to be also shifted, let go, change, transform. Transform is the word, which yoga is amazing at doing. You have to transform those old beliefs, and where awareness is always the first step. You become aware of what the old beliefs are, and then they become transformed as you focus on what it is that you really want. And that there is an identification process, and that, of course, you have to understand where it is that you want to go. Sometimes that is just a level of surrender as well. I'm not sure how this should look, but
There's a level of resistance that often comes in. So, I mean, like your transformation process, it sounds like you were very clear in seeing the problem and what you wanted instead, but
uh,
it doesn't happen in the blink of an eye, does it? I mean,
that's because I'm talking to you about it in hindsight.
right.
If we went back, 35 years and we're at a retreat and I'm talking about it, I'm freaking out. I don't know what's going on. I don't understand how to change this thing. It's all new. And that's the glory of yoga, really. You just do it, just keep doing it, never give up. It will transform you and take you where you want to go on your spiritual path. It's amazing that way.
Yeah, that I
So,
think is one of the greatest points right there. The person who's steady is the one
yeah,
that succeeds. And,
is right.
in terms of being an ongoing process, I know that we do a practice of self-study in yoga, where at the end of the day, you look at your day and you see what you did well and what you didn't do so good, and try to be open to transformation. And here's Ramakrishnananda, a realized master and guru, and he says that every day he does that. Every
Wow.
day he does that process. So,
It's just,
it's an ongoing process, but it's a beautiful process, once
yeah,
you step forward.
as he says, it's a way of being, and it is a beautiful process, and it turns from a freak show to a love show. Like, you're not freaking out anymore. You're loving the fact that you
Right,
get to do this, that you get to lay in your bed and think about what a day this was. This was
right,
amazing.
right.
And as you grow, you have more love and more awareness and
There's
all of these.
more, and it comes from a very harmonized, peaceful place, which is a very different thing than it was for me before yoga. So,
Except when you drop your laptop.
right, except when things like that happen, we've got to be careful of the drop laptop days. So,
So,
I
so,
hope.
but I have a question for you too, because before we go, I want you to just talk a little bit about this. One of the other areas that, of course, most yogis have worked with in their growth is the area of beliefs.
Hmm.
How does that work in the yoga process? Like, how do you know when a particular belief is not working for you anymore, or that something that you do believe is just utterly wrong? You just know it's not that way anymore. Like, how does one get past those old beliefs and create something new for themselves? That makes sense.
Yes, and I think there's a great practice for just taking the old belief, visualizing a fire, or if you have a fireplace and it's winter, and just throwing the old belief into the flame. Because
Yeah.
what that does, you use your physical body, you use every one of your mental, emotional, spiritual abilities to do that, and you just try to be open to what's next. Try not to direct it or dictate it. Like, I'm letting go of this old belief because I've got this new one, but just let go of the old belief.
That's a great thing for listeners to know as the holidays come up, because isn't that a
Mhm.
practice we used to do at the end of every year? You
Yes,
know, you're letting go of the last year, bringing in the energy for the new year. That's a
right,
great.
right. And what we do, we actually have a little chant we do. We when we throw it into the fire,
It's an
So
Om chant, isn't it?
yeah,
Can they
it's Om
just
Namo Shivaya. Yeah.
Om Namo Shivaya? Okay,
Right.
so they can do that.
Mm.
Just chant when you throw it in. You just chant Om Namo
Shiva is
Shivaya.
the transformer, and so you just
Right.
throw it in, and the idea is to get the feeling of, like, the reason you use fire is because you let it go and it's gone.
Right.
That's kind of the sense. So
For you anymore?
yeah,
Gone.
and just let yourself try to be open. It takes a little practice, but after a while it gets easy and
Absolutely.
it gets exciting. So
Yes, I look forward to that every year because it just feels like a renewal, you know.
yeah,
So it's
and the other chant is Om Swaha, which is also about Shiva. Om
oh,
Swaha. That's the one we typically use at the center when we have a candle lit. Om Swaha, but it's also about Shiva. So
that's amazing. Okay.
okay,
Um, wait a minute, I gotta see if I have any other questions for you. I think that's it.
I think we've given folks a lot to chew on tonight, and
Yeah,
hopefully
so
this will help you at whatever step you're on, and help you to be more open to taking the next step forward.
yeah, and listeners, if you have any questions about this
Hmm.
process, you're in the middle of it, because we had a gazillion questions.
Yes,
All
yeah.
you know, just send them to me at my website or Chris at the Yoga Center, and we will get back to you. We will answer them either in the next session or on the Facebook group, which we now
Good.
have a Facebook group for the Yoga Center.
Yep,
So we can do it there as well.
yep.
Just let us know so we can help you.
So thanks for tuning in with us, and we'll see you next time.
Coming. Bye.
Bye.